All right, so this is my report on the Morchellaceae family. It's specifically uh, more about the morels that fruit in Western North America. Um, Morels do occur pretty much almost everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. All right, so I'm going to begin by just giving a little bit of an introduction about myself. As you heard, my name is Jordan, and I have about 4 years um, experience harvesting mushrooms commercially, from Morels to matsutake, along with many other delectable edibles. Um, Currently, I'm a member of our very first study group, and this is a presentation that I created for that group, and it's really packed full of a lot of knowledge. It's pretty data heavy. Um, it's going to be a little bit different than most normal presentations. I'm not going to really read the slides. I'm going to kind of comment on it and provide some more details and information and elaborate on that more. So um, if you're like trying to take notes and you're kind of falling behind, don't stress. We'll get this up on the website in the members area for you. So it'll be there for you if you need it. All right. So I hope a lot of you have been able to get out in the woods and find some morels this season. It's been a great season. We've this cool weather and the rain has really extended it, and it's just recently kind of coming to a slow crawl to an end. But this will hopefully provide you with information to help you be more successful finding morels in the future. All right. This first slide here is a classification scheme. This is essentially a family tree mapping out a mushroom's fungal lineage. And then at the bottom here in the families, you can see that there is an additional family, the Discanaceae family. I've included this because there is a small section on this family because one of its members is one of the most commonly mistaken mushrooms for morels. So there'll be a section on there on that. And this isn't, super important. It's just to kind of let you know. All right. The Morchellaceae family has mainly 3 generas: the Morchella, Verpa, and Discoides. As you can see in the lower left-hand corner, there's a picture of Morel spores stacked up in the asci. There's typically 8 spores per asci. In the cluster, in the picture in the upper right-hand corner, you can see a cluster of spores. Morels typically don't have any oil droplets, but as you can see, there are some minute crowns of small oil droplets that can occur on the outside of the spore. This is one of the key identifying factors when trying to guarantee that the mushroom you have is indeed a morel. One way to tell for sure if you have a morel, a verpa, or a gyrometra is by cutting the mushroom in half and looking at how the cap attaches to the stem. As you can see in the diagram, the morel has a cap that is intergrown with the stem. which means that at no point does the cap detach, from where the cap begins to where the stem ends. It is one solid piece. That is one of the main identifying factors of the morel mushroom. And as you can see, the Gyromecha esculente and the Verpa bohemica have a stem that attaches to the top of the cap. It's almost like a thimble resting on top of your fingertip. And that's one of the most easily identifying factors to tell if you have a morel. All right. When it comes to morels, there's been a lot of changes that are happening, especially with that are going to be happening with the names, the current scientific names. Right now, most of our mushroom names are named after their European cousins, and we've been coming to find out is that they are genetically different. So there's going to be a lot of name changes coming out. We're already starting to see some come out with the hedgehog mushrooms, for instance. They've currently changed, I believe it's Hydnum repandum to Hydnum olympicum, and then Hydnum, oh, what's the other one? It's a smaller variety, but this is currently called Hydnum oregonensis. So expect many more changes to come. And if you've ever keyed out a mushroom and Mushrooms Demystified, you know that the scientific names used in that book are often no longer accurate, and quite a few mushrooms have changed generas and families, and so that can be quite frustrating when you're trying to identify a mushroom. So always make sure to double check on the internet to see if that is if that is its current name. When it comes to polymorphism, as you can see in the picture here, this is a morel I found this spring. You can see that the cap clearly attaches to the stem, but for some reason, the stem continued to grow up through the center of the morel, almost all the way up to the tip of the cap. And this is kind of, this is something I don't come across very often, but this season I came across two. I also came across the morel that had two stem walls. It almost looked like there was a smaller morel growing inside of it. And these are just some kind of weird polymorphic changes that can happen to these mushrooms. And it can also vary the color, the size of the ridges, the depth of the pitting, which can make it very, very frustrating trying to accurately ID what variety or what species of morel you have. As you'll see, when discussing morel ecosystems, you will hear the terms forested riparian zone, burn areas, areas of disturbance, and non-burn areas. You'll hear those terms used frequently. To elaborate, an area of disturbance refers to places where the soil has been disturbed by human activity, mainly like logging or natural disturbances like landslides. Our coast range, because it is considered a rainforest, it gets a lot of landslides, although the coast range isn't the best place to go when looking for morels. If you're going to be out there, it's a great place to have a peek and see what's growing. you might get lucky. I also find them in the tracks of heavy machinery, so like caterpillar tracks, excavator tracks. Um, Oftentimes you'll find them fruiting in those tracks, so that's another great place to look, or around burn piles if they've burnt the slash piles that they have. That's another great place to look. When it comes to forested riparian zones, those are areas that have woodland and moving water, like a creek, river, brook, or stream. You can also find them fruiting around lakes and ponds and things like that. Pretty much that water is going to keep the humidity high, which is going to help the mushrooms fruit. Burn areas are places in a forest that has had a fire the previous fall. The previous fall is really the big key, indicator when you're looking for a fire. Those ones are going to fruit more prolifically and will end up, producing better for you, and you should find more. Non-burn areas are forests that haven't had any recent fires. So if you go in there, the underbrush is intact, it hasn't all been burnt or cleared out and whatnot. And I will admit I do not like hunting for morels in non-burn areas. I feel like I find them few and far between. So if I'm out there specifically looking for morels, I tend to try to find an area in my research that's going to produce well. All right, with natural black morels, I've done very well in forests that have had tens of thousands of trees killed by bark beetles. Um, but the amount of trees that they damage every year can fluctuate from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands or even greater. There are projects going on by the Oregon Department of Forestry to try and manage the beetle population to reduce tree loss. So I wouldn't really prioritize using this method to find morels. However, if I do come across an article in my research about massive tree loss due to insect damage, I think it's worth checking out if there hasn't been many good burns in the fall. And, you know, and typically they do prefer fruiting in the second season, the second spring after a fire, but that the amount of morels that you'll find in the second season of a fire isn't nearly as great. So again, you want to prioritize, fires from the previous fall if, getting a large amount of mushrooms is your goal. But if you want to study this mushroom, check it out in the second year. You'll find a lot more growing in fires in burned areas. Oops. Back button. All right. With pink and green morels, I tend not to find them very commonly, and they can be kind of hard to identify. They can easily be, depending on the age of the mushroom, it can lose color as it ages. So you really need a fresh specimen to be able to tell. Um, this mushroom is, yeah, I did happen to find two of these mushrooms this spring. They were my second find. They're often referred to as pickles because the greens kind of resemble them. They're, was it the Chicago Field Museum was collecting data on pink and green morels for a research project that ended in 2010. I'm really hoping to get access to that data soon. I would like to, do some more research in regards to this type of morel and their relationship with burn areas. You know, it seems like something that would be a kind of a fun research project. All right, gray morels. I would not want to be a taxonomist in charge of deciphering this family or this genera mushroom. Um, it's very polymorphic. The amount of shape, sizes, color, it really varies, and I don't know, it's pretty, it's a pretty interesting mushroom. Some of the colorations on it are just absolutely stunning with kind of, and these tend to be the more common mushrooms you find in burn areas in the first spring. They fruit the most prolifically, and even though it may not look like a gray, it, if you find it in a burn area, it probably is. It's easier to tell, like when the mushroom's first pinning, that's the easiest to tell because most of them are pretty much gray, and then as they age they'll start to change and change color, and I find these to be very, very interesting species. Mountain blondes, they tend to fruit more frequently in Western North America. They prefer our forests and are found in the Cascade Range and the Sierra Nevada mountain range. If you harvested any blonde colored mushrooms this fall or this spring in non-burn areas, they're most likely blondes. Blondes tend to fruit on non-burned islands. And I found a few blondes this year. Sorry. I found a few blondes this year that were fruiting on non-burned islands in a burn area. I thought that was extremely interesting because you typically do not find blondes in burns. And then non-burned islands, if you're interested, are small areas in a fire that for some reason the fire left mostly untouched. It still has ground cover. It hasn't been burnt to absolute soil, to dust. Especially if you're in Central Oregon, and these are very common as naturals. Yellow morels, it's similar to blondes and it can be kind of hard to tell the difference between them. They fruit more frequently in Eastern North America, and they prefer their forests over there, like the Appalachian mountain range. However, we do get yellow morels here in Oregon. They're not as abundant, and they tend to appear more frequently in fruit orchards, and they appear as perennial patches. When I commercially harvested morels, we would start the season out by harvesting these perennial patches. We'd go to farmers that have old orchards, and we'd start there and then start working our way up to higher elevations as the season moves on, finishing out in burn areas. And morels, they fruit from a tuber-like structure called sclerotia. You can see that in the picture there. It somewhat resembles a truffle, and it's not specific to yellows. It also is how all morels fruit, is from sclerotia. The sclerotia is one of the unique features for the morel that helps them withstand the summer heat and the winter freeze. And it'll be in the soil waiting for the proper conditions to fruit. Now, I couldn't find too much information on M. rubobrunnii. It's one of the few morels that fruits in subtropical environments. These environments have to have a cold to mild winter, and these are generally located between latitudes 25 to 35 degrees. And this is about as far down as morels will fruit. They cannot withstand environments that do not get a cold to freezing winter temperatures. Half-free morels. These mushrooms most closely resemble Verpa bohemica, and they can be difficult to differentiate between them until you cut them in half. As you can see in the pictures here, the cap does directly connect to the stem, but about halfway up. And this is where it can get confusing, because just by initial inspection, it can look like Verpa bohemica. One thing I'd like to point out is, when you're trying mushrooms and you're out there picking them for the first time, if you're not 100% sure if it's a morel, a half-free, or Verpa, just toss it out. If you're not 100% sure, just don't eat it. It's not worth the risk. There's so many delicious mushrooms that grow in our forests. We just, why risk it? Why? Your health is more important. All right, we're going to talk about morel lookalikes here for a little bit. One of the key differentiating features between Gyrometra esculente, which is shown in the picture in the bottom right and the bottom left picture, you can see Gyrometra next to a morel. You can see how they look similar, but the pitting in the morel is much more obvious. Whereas the Gyrometra esculente, it really doesn't look like there's much pitting, if any at all. And the ridges on the morel tend to run more vertically, where the Gyrometra, it's more brain-like and wavy. It doesn't tend to run in any kind of general direction. Another way you can tell a difference between a morel and a Gyrometra is by the spore. The Gyrometra spore here in the middle picture, you can see a big oil droplet in the middle. Sometimes there are two smaller droplets on either side, and that is for sure, one way to tell if you have a Gyrometra or a morel. All right. This is Verpa bohemica. As you can see, it really greatly resembles a morel. This one, I think, more greatly resembles a morel than Gyrometra. The ridges are run a bit more vertically, and it appears to have some pitting. But if you look in between the ridges, it lacks any kind of connective, ridges in between pitting like a morel does. And again, the stem attaches directly to the top of the cap. The cap itself doesn't directly connect with, isn't intergrown with the stem like a morel. You can technically, according to some people, eat both, Dharmitra esculente and Verpa mushrooms, Verpa bohemica, but it's really not recommended. Some people have, eaten these mushrooms for years and without any problems, but then suddenly one day they get really sick, or something worse happens. So again, it's not recommended to eat it. I wouldn't stick to the other safer, better mushrooms out there. I mean, again, don't risk your life. And another, if you look at the spore in the upper right, you can see how it's more elliptical and it has lots of little oil droplets in it. Again, that'll definitely, if you have a microscope, that'll definitely tell you that you do not have a morel and that you're dealing with a verpa. The ecosystems that morel occurs in is pretty much only in the northern hemisphere. Because of our planet's tropical equator, morels cannot travel south naturally. Humans have brought morels to the southern hemisphere for cultivation purposes, and to release in their forests to increase the revenue that they can make off their forest land and whatnot. As you can see, on this map, there's it tends to prefer oak forests and mixed oak savanna forests that typically occur in the eastern North America, but they do really like our true, our pine forests and whatnot, and lodgepole pines. The Willamette Valley used to have a lot of oak forests and oak savannas, and unfortunately, most of that has been logged, and the forests that do exist are private. So getting access to hunt those types of woods here in the Willamette Valley is extremely difficult. And I think we're down to about 20% of our oak forest left in the Willamette Valley. So if you're ever planting trees on Earth Day, plant some oak trees. We need them. The trees listed here that are associated with morels are typically associated with natural occurring morels, and you can usually find them fruiting around the base of the trees. I tend to find them fruiting on the west and east sides of the trees more commonly and in greater numbers. I do find them on the south and north side occasionally, but it seems to be, they tend to appear more on the east and west for some reason. And again, naturals, they can be few and far between in our forests. It seems like whenever I'm out looking for naturals, I go about 30 minutes sometimes between finding, clusters of them. So I tend to stick to burns. They tend to produce more, and you have better odds at finding larger quantities. However, if you have land or access to land with perennial patches like old orchards, or if you live in eastern North America, they tend to prioritize naturals because they don't do a lot of controlled burns over there, and their forests are highly managed. There's really not a lot of fires, so they tend to, on the east coast, they tend to have to stick to mainly naturals. With how diverse and unique morels are, there's still so much to learn, and there are still many species that have yet to be scientifically described and named. This family of mushrooms has been around for millions of years, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface in regards to figuring out this complex species of fungi. When I go out scouting and to try and figure out when morels are going to start fruiting, I look for Gyrometra mushrooms. They tend to fruit just before, and same with purpose. They just tend to fruit just before and during morel season. Also, what was formerly in the Gyrometra family is Dacina perlata, which is this pig's ear shaped mushroom in the upper right hand corner. As another great indicator, it's considered a snowbank fungi, and and I found some growing at the bases of, and it's a good indicator to let you know. This is an really early indicator. If you see that, you know you're about 2 weeks to a month out. In the picture in the lower right hand corner is a really beautiful mushroom. It's called Sarcosophyria coronaria. If you've ever been out, picking morels, you will see this mushroom everywhere. It fruits just before and prolifically during morel season. And if I'm out scouting and I see these mushrooms, I know I needed to keep my eyes peeled, slow down, and start looking because there's probably morels out. And when you have morels, they tend to start fruiting, at lower elevations and then move to higher elevations. So, you don't want to stick to one area for too long. It's you want to, keep moving to, I usually will notate burns at different elevations so that way I know, okay, after this burn, I'm going to go to this next one at this elevation, and that'll usually keep me on track at staying, you know, where the mushrooms are currently fruiting. The Mesozoic era is the era of the dinosaurs and includes the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. Uh, this era is marked with two mass extinction events at the beginning and end, and it also included the reign of the dinosaurs. As you can see in the pictures here are some fossilized mushroom and an imprint of mushroom caps. Another interesting fact is that 460 million years ago, before the Earth was covered by trees, it was covered by giant mushrooms, some as tall as a house. They could reach up to, I believe, like 20 feet. And morels appear to be the ancestral home. Uh, their ancestral home appears to be North America. Um, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, and again, that's another reason why it's important that um, these name changes happen. Um, there's just a lot of how do I put that? One second, I need a drink. Morel mushrooms are one of the more valuable forest products in our region. And as you can see in the pictures, these are from a Morel farm in Sichuan, China, where they have figured out how to cultivate morels in the ground. They tend not to get very many years of production out of these fields before the morels, for some reason, just stop growing, and they have to move to a different plot of land and start all over again. It doesn't seem to be like the best way to do it right now, but it works. However, you want to be careful when buying mushrooms from other countries. You want to make sure to check where they originated from. Many mushrooms harvested from China are can be contaminated with pollutants and other toxins, so you want to be careful. That's another reason why our wild harvested mushrooms, like morels and matsutake, are highly prized and tend to be worth more money in international markets. Although there's a rush, of everyone trying to figure out how to commercially produce morels. So far, it seems like no one's been able to figure out how to uh, keep morels fruiting long term, without running into problems. So hopefully, one of these days, it'll be a more common mushroom in the store if it does become commercially viable. All right. In regards to research projects, um, currently the Tree of Life Foundation, they're trying to map out just everything from fungi to plants to fish, reptiles, amphibians, insects. They're trying to map and describe everything, and they have multiple research projects going on. One of them is the Morel project in the Ascomycete branch, and they're currently working on identifying all of the morels that occur in the countries around the world. And I think that would be a cool project to check out. It's something that could help provide you with some information. Another research project that was run by the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago about the pink and green morels. It ran from 2001 to 2010 and is closed. But I still think that, with all the changes with technology coming out there, that there's still potential for new discoveries. So even though research projects come to an end, we should still continue collecting data and taking notes, because you never know when, it might help lead to a new discovery. We're finding out so much about mushrooms, especially with genetic testing, on how they can really benefit us health wise and cure disease and help, help reverse illness and things like that. So the more we learn, the better we become. All right, this presentation was based off a research paper from the USDA Ecology and Management of Morels harvested from the forests of Western North America. Some of the pictures were photographed by me, but most are from the internet. There's way too many to list online, so if you're an academic, I'm sorry, my sources cited is not the greatest. All right, so this concludes my presentation. We'll move on to the question and answer part.